Hi there, and welcome to Back to Basics. Today we're talking about earth-based spirituality. My name is Heather. I am a spiritual coach and circle facilitator, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about the philosophy that I use in my work. This is video 2 in a series of 4, so if you haven't seen the first one, feel free to pause this one and go back to Introduction to Earth-Based Spirituality, and then come back to this video. So I'm going to share my screen with you so that you can see my slides. Here they are. All right. So for a minute, we're going to review from the first video what exactly spirituality is. So I see spirituality as how you understand your place in the big picture and how you recognize the parts of you that are unseen, stuff you can't even see with the microscope, which I call your fire. So an earth-based spirituality practice includes tending to your fire, those unseen parts. So we're going to learn a little bit about how you can use your senses to find wisdom and comfort in the world around you through a spirituality practice that is based on the earth. And so first what we're going to do is talk about the elements. And I didn't make this up. This is, ancient. There's Aboriginal cultures, indigenous cultures from around the world that break down their understanding of the planet into basic elements. And so here I have the earth, air, fire, and water elements on the screen for you. So we're going to ask a couple questions. I'm going to ask you a couple questions and we're going to try to tease out some wisdom. And of course, if we were here having a conversation with each other, some different wisdom would come up, right? You would put your perspective on it and we could have a whole discussion about what we find by analyzing how we see these elements. And I hope to do that with you someday. But for today, I'm going to tell you a little bit about how I see it. So if you take the planet as a whole, so the whole Earth, the whole globe, and you break it down into these elements, we can think for a second of where you find each one. So if you start with Earth, that would be the solid parts, the soil and the mountains and anything you can really hold in your hands, right? Then there's air, which is anything that's in the form of a gas. I think of the air around me in this room. That is air. Water is the liquid, so the rivers and the lakes and the oceans. And then the fire is the heat, or if we're talking about you, your spirit. So if you take a whole entity, just like in laws of physics, and you notice it has certain parts, what will be true is that all the pieces of that whole will also have those same parts. And just like laws of physics, we can apply the same principles to all those parts as well. So if you look at your body, for example, you can find the earth parts, the stuff that you can touch. You can find the air parts, which is your breath, right? Breathing in and out. You can find your water parts, which is the blood that runs through you, the moisture in your body. Think of your brain as lots of water. I think our bodies are like 60% water. And then the fire, which is the heat that is within you, right? You have this metabolism that makes heat. And you also have your spirit. So the first question that I have for you, now that we're kind of all on the same page about what the elements are for this conversation, can any of the elements exist without the others? So is any one element like the original element and then the other ones like depend on it or no? So when I think about earth, I notice that right now, if I go out and pick up some soil, there is air in that soil and there is water in that soil. It's hard to tease out just a bit of earth, right? They're all, that soil has some heat in it, right? It has a temperature. So the same thing with water. If I go to the stream near my house, the water is going to have a certain air content inside it. It's going to have a temperature, which is the fire, and it's going to have particles in it, minerals and things like that, which is part of the earth. So with my interpretation, my view is that none of these elements can really be teased out completely from each other. They all work together to form one whole. So for me, none of these exist separately. And because we are on the earth, we come up from the earth, we go back into the earth, we take little pieces of the earth and put them in our mouth so that we can keep going. I see us, all of us humans, all of the organisms here, as part of the earth whole, right? So we are little bits of the surface of the earth bopping around for a little while, doing our thing, and then we'll go back into the surface of the earth when we are done. So if you extrapolate that a little bit further, you can think about the organisms of the earth, all the parts of the environment. If you go for a walk in the woods, you look all around and you can see trees and you can see grass and you can see the creek. But to me, what you are seeing, no matter what your eyes land on, is a part of the surface of the earth, right? We are all one whole. None of us can exist independently without the other. That also means to me that we are not separate from each other, right? So if we can put boundaries around countries and we can, in our minds, separate us between races or ages or things like that. But when it gets down to the material reality and the spiritual reality of our planet, we are one human population. We are not, none of us can live independently from anyone else. So that was the first question. The second question is, which element is the most important? Which is like the top of the hierarchy, right? If you were going to make a hierarchy of elements, which is like the best and like the next best, is there one that's the most important? So when I think about, let's say, my body, for example, I don't see any of these as the most important. They all seem pretty essential. I couldn't live without air or water or fire or earth, like my breath and my blood. Like none of them, I can't pull anyone out that says, this is the most important. We don't need another one as much. So for me, all the elements are equal. They are all essential. They all have value and they all have a purpose. And I feel the same way about all the humans, right? I feel that all the humans are equal on this planet. We are all essential. We all have value and we all have our own purpose. And just again, if you're going on that walk in the woods by your house and you looked at any of the parts that you found, you could say the same thing about the trees and the rocks and that kind of thing. All equal, all essential, all of that. So you come across this idea, you come to develop this idea of equality. So equality between the elements, equality between the parts of the world, and equality between all people. So here's kind of a visual example of our Western consumerist society, right? Puts us in this kind of a triangle. So like I said in the previous video, our beliefs about the world are developed when we are very small, when we are around between 3 and 7 years old. And they're not explicitly said, like no one is walking around. I mean, maybe definitely in some religious context, they might be, and I think there's a story in the Bible or some passages in the Bible about humans are here to take care of the earth. But if you put all the other learnings aside and you just take a look at the earth and take a look at what you actually notice, there is no organism that can exist alone. No one organism is in charge. That is a myth of our culture. So you can see in the triangle part how we have this idea that it's an egoic idea that we are the most important at the top, and we are more valuable than, and then you can see it goes down, right? So that is this Western culture, consumerist, capitalist idea where this hierarchy exists on that one side. On the other side, you can see this circle here, and this is based on a philosophy that humans are just one participant in a whole host of participants that make up the earth, right? So we are no more important than the snails, and the snails are no more important than us, right? If you take a look at all the parts of the earth, they're all equally important, including humans. So it's a departure. This is where if you study earth-based spirituality and you come up with your own ideas, you'll find many places there's a departure from the mainstream Western philosophy. So if you want to start to study and start to practice earth-based spirituality, you'll notice that you don't need to worship any gods, any separate outside human-like being. You don't need any ancient writings. You don't need any authority figures. No one needs to tell you what to do. And there's no dogma, so there's no universal truth that you can't question. What you can use when you practice earth-based spirituality to gain an understanding of the world is access to your inner spirit, your passion, your inspiration, your senses, so the ways that you observe and take in the world, a sense of cooperation. So instead of a hierarchy, there's this way that this belief that humans can work together, and curiosity, because you'll be constantly diving into your belief systems to try to figure out, what is really true for you if you were to, start from scratch and decide. So the second part of the philosophy that I want to talk about in this video is the seasonal cycles. So when you look at this circle, you'll notice winter, spring, summer, and autumn. And I like to use this cycle first because I think it gives us the most vivid picture in most of our minds. You know what winter looks like, you know what spring looks like, you know what happens in the summer, and you know what happens in the autumn. You might even have feelings attached to this, like how do you feel in the winter? How do you feel in the spring? You could go through and write characteristics for all of these seasons. So we know them pretty well, right? So what you'll notice as you study the cycles of nature is that they all have the same seasons. There's a universal cycle. And so if you take any cycle, life cycle, growth cycle, any cycle of change that you can find in nature, and you put them all on top of each other, stack, 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 like we're about to do, you'll notice they all have these same basic seasons. So here we're going to layer the moon cycle on top of the seasonal cycle. So there they come. All right, so I'm going to show you what they have in common. Just a little quick overview. So here's the new moon, and it is the darkest night of the month. And here is the winter solstice, which is the darkest night of the year. And then when you come down here, you have the summer solstice, which is, see, it's right at the beginning of summer, and it is the brightest day of the year. And here is the full moon, which is the brightest night of the year. So then you can come over and find this time the equinox. So over here, you have the autumn equinox, and the moon is half lit, so it's completely balanced, light and dark. And it's also in the sky for only half of the night. And the same over here for the spring equinox. So you can see how they have these commonalities. And if we layer one more cycle, so here is the day, we could do lots more. The lifespan of a human is another fun one to do. If you want, you can take a piece of paper and you can draw lots of circles and you can find the seasons for all of them. That's a fun first exercise. So here is midnight. It is it lines up with the winter solstice and the new moon. And if we switch, instead of to light, we switch to temperature, you'll notice that midnight past 3 a.m. into 6 a.m., this is the coldest part of the day cycle, and it's also, see, it correlates with the winter. So then you come over here, at least on the equinox, 6 a.m., the sun comes up, you've reached dawn, right? And now the heat of the day is growing and growing and growing, just like the spring. And then we've come around to noon, which lines up with the summer solstice and the full moon. The sun is high in the sky, and then we have the hottest part of the day. So unless there's some weather activity, rain or something, usually from noon to 3 and on, this is the summer of the day. Then you've reached the equinox here, the autumn equinox, and that's in the cycle of the day, that's at dusk. And then, the day is shedding its light all the way back to midnight when the sun is on the opposite side of the earth. So like I said, if you want to take a piece of paper, you can draw lots of different cycles and learn. I nerd out on this stuff all the time. It's my favorite thing to think about because we can pull so much wisdom from studying the cycles that naturally change and applying it to our own cycles. So here's just a couple snippets that I thought of quickly off the top of my head. We talked about how all entities have cycles, right? So there's thousands of cycles going on in your body, from hormones to cell reproduction to emotions, all the things. All the changes you experience in your body have cycles, all the way out to your life cycle, right? Change is constant. There's never a pause. There's really not. Change can feel like it's happening very slow, but it's always happening. And then we have this pattern of light and dark alternating, and movement and stillness alternating. So you can apply that to, nobody gets through life without hard things happening, and we all hopefully have some easy times too. So there's this alteration between easy and difficult, dark and light, movement and stillness, right? That we can all detect if we really break it down. So earth-based spirituality, practicing earth-based spirituality means shifting your beliefs to center the wisdom of the earth, right? So it means reevaluating why you do what you do and why you live the way you live, and shifting, really exploring into what you believe based on what you can observe from life around you. And it means cultivating your identity as an earthling. So your identity can be a consumer. Your identity can be a citizen of a certain country. We have, all these identities, depending on relationship, what we're in relationship to. But when you take on the beliefs of earth-based spirituality, you see yourself as primarily an earthling, right? So we are all part of the same whole, first and foremost. And what that tells me is that what the earth needs is what we need too. So if you're like me, and when you look at the planet and you see the state, our current state of things, I start to hope for a different trajectory. I see the trajectory that what we've been doing has gotten us on, and I see a planet in crisis. I see a people in crisis. I see many problems that have their root cause in the philosophy and the spirituality and the beliefs that we have had for the past few thousand years. And when I endeavor to make a difference on that, I know that we need to shift, right? If something's going to change, we need to shift our basic principles. And the way that we can start to understand that, to do what's best for the human population, that is the same as what's best for the entire world. So I love this quote: "We have yet to understand that if I am starving, you are in danger." So if you have an infection in your baby toe, right, your littlest toe, but it gets really bad, right, that infection can eventually threaten your whole body, right? Our whole body is connected to each other, right? Just like the entire world, is connected all the way around. And if there's a problem in one spot, right, it eventually affects everybody. So earth-based spirituality is the essential shift that we need to make if we want to shift out of our current trajectory. I believe that if we align our beliefs, and hence our actions, right, with what the earth needs, right, with the principles that we can learn from focusing on what is alive in and around us, then we can start to understand the changes that we need to make. So luckily, Earth's wisdom is everywhere. It is available to you every minute. Every time you breathe, every time you blink your eyes, every time you move, every time you think, that is the earth moving and breathing and thinking. So whether you live in a tiny apartment somewhere, you are still breathing the air of the earth, right? Or whether you live on a farm somewhere, you might have access to seeing, different cycles at play. But the wisdom of the earth is not exclusive to any certain people or any certain location. It is available to everyone everywhere. Luckily, humans have lived by the wisdom of the seasons for 1.8 million years. So those are not all Homo sapiens over 1.8 million years, but the human kind of organism has been around for that long, and they've been using their environment to survive for a long, long time. And we can do it again. I believe that we will do it, and we'll do it together. I think we'll need to work together. So here, this is my most recent circle. Here's me playing the ukulele over here. And then here are my circle sisters being socially distant. And we're, instead of being at home watching our screens for an evening, we're hanging out with each other and witnessing what is alive in each other. So in my next video, if you're interested in learning more, I'm going to be talking about my spiritual practices and how you can start to practice earth-based spirituality if you choose. So check out the next video called Starting to Practice. And then as always, you can go to circlewithheather.com to learn about how to join a circle and see my other offerings and read my blog and that kind of thing. So I will see you in the next video.